Welcome to the study. This is Professor Hemlock here, bringing today a plus 16 Theater of Pain using a Necrolord Arcane build with the Amani Soulbind. We are using Magi's Brand as our potency conduit, with Surging Power as our finesse conduit, and then the standard defensive conduits, Tempest Barrier, and Cryo Freeze. Also, with this, there is the option to run a second potency conduit or Gnashing Chompers. The Chompers one adds essentially every time you kill a mob, you get a haste buff for 10 seconds. It stacks, it's 3% per stack, and it stacks up to a maximum of 15%. I am running Chompers here on this one. I do like the feel of it generically in any Mythic Plus content, even if it might not be suboptimal for Theater. It's definitely suboptimal for Theater of Pain with the lack of high density mobs. However, I do still like the feel of it overall, and I don't think the benefit from a second potency conduit outweighs it by much. So let's kind of jump right in here to our run. Now on this video, I do want to kind of go over not just the actual gameplay here that we're doing with Necrolord. I kind of want to also break down my feelings on Necrolord. So right here in the opener, I'm going to use all of my cooldowns right off the bat. In Theater of Pain this week, what you want to do in the opener here is use all of your cooldowns, double pull the opener, and then save Bloodlust for the actual boss fight after. Right there, pretty much what I was focusing on doing was getting my getting my Arcane Blasts out, which is kind of what you want to do when you're playing Necrolord. Since it does cleave onto 2 additional targets when you Arcane Blast, you'll want to maximize your DPS on those 3 to 4 target fights right there. We did this Hunter this run does some crazy damage. Like I am mind blown by how much damage this Hunter did. We ended up averaging 12k on that pull. Now here's where Necrolord really starts to show its biggest weakness is when you go into fights without Deathborn, it feels very, very weak. You're essentially waiting for your major cooldowns to come up, and then you're doing a very slow damage rotation. In my experience so far, it actually I end up hard casting Arcane Missiles without clear cast procs more than I would normally do on 2 to 3 target fights, simply because of the lack of utility you have losing Shifting Power. You'll kind of notice throughout this run here that the DPS I do as a Necrolord is exponentially smaller than a Night Fae Mage would. In my experience, I believe in this dungeon, I would do around mid 6k, 6.5, 6.7k DPS using the Karain Night Fae build on a Fortified week. And we'll kind of see what I end up at here on the Necrolord. Surprise, it's not as high as I would using the Karain build with Incanter's Flow, even on a dungeon where there's 5 bosses instead of 4. So essentially one of the things that is the hardest part to maximize here is constant high pressure damage. And I find in my experience, if I maximize my use of the Touch of the Magi with Arcane Power, and I do kind of purposefully cycle off here, so you can see right there, I use Arcane Power mid-fight instead of holding it for that minute where I could have had it line up with my 3-minute cooldowns a little better. In my experience, I'll get more uses out of Arcane Power, and I'll get the same uses out of Deathborn as I normally would have in a dungeon. Especially on fights like this, where there's a lot of like RP after the fight, and before we get into any serious packs where I'd need to use cooldowns, there's going to be a lot of downtime, and that'll be able to restore my cooldowns long enough. So I kind of have adopted more of a just burn it, even if it may not be perfectly optimal every single time. So far in my experience, you end up holding onto the cooldowns too long, underutilizing the cooldown, and then you're just kind of disappointed when you don't do as much damage as you could have, and realizing that you held onto a cooldown for an extremely long period of time. Now, something here that you definitely get to utilize a lot more is the single target ability during your Touch of the Magi windows. So that is why I'm running the Touch of the Magi conduit, and in my experience, why it is the best conduit to run with the Amani Soulbind. The Prodigy conduit, where you think you may get a lot of use out of it, you end up not getting a lot of use out of it, simply because in Mythic Plus, you're not using your Clearcast procs always for missiles. I did try it at one point, where I was using my Clearcast procs much more aggressively towards always using them on not barrages, but my Clearcast missiles instead of Arcane Explosions. But I ended up not liking that, and I feel like it overall did decrease the damage. So right there, one of the benefits to Necrolord is 2 dungeons where there are not a lot of Necrolords out there right now. In Top and in Plaguefall, you do get additional benefits. In Theater of Pain here, there's banners scattered throughout the dungeon. The banners give you a 10% versatility buff. So very, very useful buff. And it means you don't have to run with a Resto Shaman. It seems like Resto Shamans are really the primary users of the Necrolord, along with Death Knights, but I don't see a lot of those in my experience in higher keys, so it's kind of nice that you are Necrolord and have the ability to use those banners. So as we can kind of see here, I do have all my cooldowns coming up. So I'm just going to go ahead and use them. Another thing to note here, I actually have swapped out my trinkets as well. So I'm now using the IQD, the quantum device, which does give a long duration buff. It's on a 3-minute cooldown, so it lines up very nicely with Deathborn. So I essentially have swapped out my... I'm still using 2 on-use trinkets, and I'm using the PvP trinket as my secondary on-use, and I'm using the IQD as my primary when I'm lining that up with Deathborn. The IQD does give a better stat line benefit than the PvP trinket when the item levels are somewhat comparable. I have a 220 eye level PvP trinket and a 210 eye level IQD, so I definitely think it is the correct decision here. The IQD gives a buff of around 600 critical strike rating for me. So it is very chunky. Now this is interesting right here. What I found myself is that I'm not going to have a lot of big cooldowns for AoE packs often, just simply due to how Deathborn works and the amount of cooldown that it has. So I'm using Touch of the Magi on Pride a lot more often, even though I know, like in this situation, I'm coming up to a big AoE pack. So what I'm essentially going to try and do is I am going to simply do the AoE rotation of Arcane Explosion, Orb, Barrage, and then just gonna go back and forth, and then trying to snipe a Barrage executes. Look at the Hunter's damage here. This Hunter is doing 30k DPS right now. I've grouped with a lot of Hunters. I have never seen a Hunter pump like this guy. Crazy damage. Crazy amounts of damage. He made me feel like I was AFK the whole dungeon. Something, too, I've been trying to get better at utilizing is helping our healer out by maximizing eating food. So right here, I do have AP off cooldown, but I have the boss after the... This will spawn the Pride, and then we'll have the boss after. So I don't use AP here. I want to make sure I have it up for the boss, and I'm going to have Deathborn up for the boss as well. Especially on this fight where if this mob is the one that lives, it does this unbreakable guard mechanic where you're not going to be able to do a lot of damage during your entirety of your big go. I do block the little axe toss there. I don't have any other defensive options. I have mirrors on cooldown, I have invis on cooldown, and I have alter time on cooldown. So I'm forced to block it or die. Our shaman healer was pretty good this dungeon, but I felt like the throughput was pretty weak, so I was trying to play a little bit more aggressive with my defensive options to help that shaman feel a little bit less burdened. Oh, look at that timing. Love that. It's great. So right here, I think what I should do is probably get to 4 charges, then drop a rune, and then I should burn all of my mana. I should just hard cast Arcane Blast until I'm bone dry, weaving in my clear casting procs. With the Necrolord Covenant, I do prefer the Rune of Power build with Overpowered. Essentially, the Karain build is extremely strong when utilizing First Strikes. And due to that and Wild Hunt tactics, it's a really nice to run Incanter's Flow, but with Necrolord not having access to that constant uptime on high damaging abilities, you want to try and funnel all of your damage into your major cooldowns, and that leads you back to utilizing the major cooldowns with like IQD, you're utilizing Deathborn, and you're utilizing Overpowered and Rune of Power. So right here, we can kind of see the DPS is very strong right now. With Prideful, I was able to easily climb over 13k DPS. Now this Hunter just absolutely annihilates me in a one-shot here. Crazy damage. This Hunter is just an absolute machine. So now that we're back over 2 charges, we're just kind of playing this like we traditionally would after we're out of cooldowns. I do have Rune and Touch of the Magi back off cooldown now. So what I should do after all the movement mechanics are done, I should execute Rune. Interesting orb. I should have Touched the Magi right there. I guess I'm gonna... That was actually definitely a misplay. I should have Rune and Touched the Magi right there and used my secondary on use trinket, which is now my PvP trinket. I probably would have done a little bit more damage, and I probably would have topped the meters there. I was just a skosh behind, 6k damage behind that the DH there. If I had correctly used Rune into Touch of the Magi with my secondary on use trinket, I would have done more damage. So this DK tank has an interesting method of utilizing Bloodlust on Fortified. Essentially, utilizing Bloodlust on trash packs exclusively is what the strategy really was. So although it does feel really weird, because I decide to, essentially I'm using the old AoE rotation as just Arcane Explosion, I'm almost confused as to why things are dying so fast. And right there, just also something that I still want to recommend using the Grounding Surge for everyone. Grounding Surge is so amazing for getting in more kicks than you normally would as a caster. When we're competing against melee a lot of the time, or like this Resto Shaman here, you want to be able to kick as much as you can and not feel like you're holding your group back, and you can get some really valuable kicks. So I do like Grounding Surge for that reason. You hit a kick, you get 3.8 seconds back off of your kick CD. So right here, the tank says to wait for banner. I guess the tank's going to pull and then bring them back. But our shaman in the group, I believe the shaman, yeah, the shaman pulls it anyways and uses the banner. So we actually don't use, the tank doesn't get the banner. And I am using single target rotation here until my Touch of the Magi window ends. Now right here, I'm really worried that we're going to burst them all at once, so I double use my defensives. And then oddly enough, we don't burst them all at once. The shaman did die anyways, though. And I even use Ice Block here too. The hunter is afraid of dying. The shaman is already dead, and our death knight or our demon hunters are demon hunters, so they never die. quite the use of cooldowns there. Triple use defensive options. Right there, I forget to tab target before utilizing my kick. That's a big oopsie. Now right here I have Deathborn off cooldown, I have a P off cooldown, and I know we have a long while before we get to the boss, so I can utilize all my cooldowns here, and I do decide to use all my cooldowns here. And the Hunter did as well, so it's unfortunate we both stack our offensive abilities. This run just kind of felt like that the whole run. This Hunter is a freaking monster. Just does so much damage. And it seemed like whenever I was utilizing cooldowns, he would also have his cooldowns up and able to use them. So we kind of were never able to desync our cooldowns enough. So we were actually negatively impacting each other's DPS. Big thing here when you're going back to the rune build is that you are, if you are playing Necrolord, you got to get used to playing that rune build, and then you really got to just drop rune as much as you can. And this is something I've been getting used to these last 2 weeks, 3 weeks now that I've been playing Necrolord, is just utilizing those cooldowns. Looks like we double kick there. One of the problems with pugs is you will often double kick things that can later lead to a wipe. It does suck. If you are in a pre-made group, calling out your kicks is one of the best ways to make sure you are effectively utilizing your options, and you don't need to use as many defensive options. I do have to move there, so I use Presence of Mind. We're taking a lot of damage. I pop all of my defensive cooldown options there, and I Fat Finger Arcane Explosion on accident. Hitting nothing. Real pretty looking. So this fight definitely feels like one of those things where Necrolord it definitely feels bad. Where my damage is just extremely low, 3.8k damage when I don't have the cooldowns up. Shifting Power just really makes it feel like you can always have Rune down, you can always have Touch of the Magi available, and then especially with Karain, it just feels like you have endless options. The ability to constantly damage here. So something I try and do a lot is I decurse very frequently. And then I'm always trying to position myself so I am ready to move to the next one here. So this is a great positional change. Just being ready to go on to the next area. All right, so right here I should be using Deathborn. Oh, you know what? I think I hold for the boss, actually. I don't think there's 3 minutes. We can check the timer. We're at 19 minutes right now. We'll see if I made a good decision or a bad decision. I could have used Deathborn previously. Taking a lot of damage there, so I utilized the invisibility. I do have the debuff. My kick's on cooldown right now, so I can't kick anything, so we're kind of relying on someone else to get all these necrotic bolts. My kick comes off cooldown, and I kick the Death Speakers. We get the curse on us. We decurse again. Looks like we're getting a little bit of frame drop there. Sorry about that for everyone watching the video. And then it is just a traditional rotation here, making sure we're getting as many kicks as possible. Our Demon Hunter did die there. He got booped off the edge. So since he did get booped off the edge, the tank wanted to slow down DPS as much as possible. but the hunter is going to utilize cooldowns here. That way, we don't get it to 20 stacks and we don't have a wipe. So right here, this is a pretty much a prime example. It was 1910 at pull time left. I shouldn't have used Deathborn, which is a good decision, but I should have used Arcane Power. So I made the mistake of holding on to Arcane Power here when I absolutely did not need to. I would have used Arcane Power and probably not had it for the first, 5 to 10 seconds of this fight, but I would have been able to have it up still for the primary damage section of this pull. So that definitely feels bad. And that's part of the reason why Necrolord is just so... when you make a mistake, it does feel bad. So you start having things where you're just not utilizing those CDs, and it's really hard to know when is the right time to utilize them versus maybe I should hold here. So this, we get the bug here, so you can kind of see, I'm like, well, I'm fucked. I make it to this one. But as you can see up top there, in the top left of the screen, the hands, the grasping hands, are now spawned onto the ceiling. They're basically in the air, floating. So there's only one right there. Our DH grabs it, and I just run after. I utilized a defensive option there to make sure that I wasn't, going to die. But see how it just disappeared there? The grasping hands just disappeared. So now we have nowhere to grab, use our grasping hands. And it's a glitch. I haven't seen this glitch, actually, ever before this run. But thankfully, our healer here does an amazing job of keeping us up through this. As you can kind of see, I'm like, what the fuck is that? All right, so going into the final zone here, we've already cleared past this. We do have the banner. And this will give us a 5-minute buff for... And I told everyone to group up. All right, so right here, it looks like we have Rune off cooldown, which I hopefully, there we go. I should kick that. Oh, whew, whew. That was close. That was way too close. I kicked that by the thinnest margin, but it looks like we missed the next one, so kind of unfortunate. I could have used Touch of the Magi there. That might have been a little bit more effective. But I have Deathborn. Oh, excuse me. Huh. I do have Deathborn off cooldown, so I think my logic there was I am going to hold Touch of the Magi for my Arcane Power. And I didn't think we'd kill this in 45 seconds, so... We'll see how that pans out. I should use all my cooldowns on the next pull, and that should make it so I have my cooldowns up by the next boss. We have a little debate going on in chat right now about when is the best time to lust. Our tank is requesting lust right now. And the other demon hunter is not wanting to lust right now, so I have all my cooldowns up. Why not Lust? And then look at this Hunter again. 32k DPS. I'm doing 25k. I was doing 25k, but that freaking Hunter is doing 30 plus thousand DPS. But again, since I used my cooldowns and the Hunter used his cooldowns, it ended up being one of those situations where now we both used and just absolutely annihilated those packs so freaking fast. Alaneth telling me I'm out of mana. Very responsible. I stopped to type to something into chat, but then I cancel my typing into chat because it's just no sense in arguing in a pug. At this point, the argument, I'm worried it's actually going to get toxic enough to the point where someone ends up leaving over it, because we're doing a really good run right now with only 5 deaths. I don't even want to talk to anything about it. So at this point right now, we can look at my cooldowns here. And although I did a lot of good damage with my cooldowns up on that pack where we bloodlusted, now I will not have Deathborn available for the boss on pull. Might make it. Maybe we're going to make Deathborn available on the pull. Maybe. I get to 4 charges, then I drop Rune. Great use right there. So that's kind of what you would generally want to do, is make sure you get to 4 charges before you drop your secondary Rune. I didn't use Touch of the Magi here because I want to make sure I have that up for the boss. And it looks like I am 15 seconds shy of having Deathborn available. So what I should do here is I should just go into a no DPS rotation, I should just chill, not do anything with it. And here we go. I'm going to wait till after this grab happens. Then I'm going to get into a nice position to make sure I'm isolated. I use Deathborn, Touch of the Magi, AP. Even though I have clear casting procs, it is a DPS decrease to use those clear casting procs when those other mobs are alive. I do use them the second those mobs die. I do lose out on 1 clear casting proc there, unfortunately. I utilize my presence of mind right there for movement, so that was very good. Now we have 10 seconds left on the Pride right now, so what I should be doing is hard casting as much Arcane Blast as I possibly can. Got to run out of that, though. Following the ABCs right there. Always be casting. Even when we're needing to do movement right there, I still was hitting up some Arcane Explosions. We use Rune, Touch of the Magi, and we're going into a single target damage phase now. Making sure I squeak out. Now I'm going to pause it there for a second. I orbed to get more charges and then went back to it. Looks like I had a little bit of a frame drop there, so it might have been missed there. I utilized my orb to turn around, gain more charges, and get a secondary blast in off of the additional mobs to have it be a 4-charge blast, so, or a barrage. So at this point, when the boss is nearly dead, I should have probably actually Arcane Explosion there to get more charges, but instead of Fire Blast. Overall, pretty good though. 5.8k DPS on that boss. Pretty clean. Because we did use Deathborn, we're probably not going to have Deathborn up for the start of the pull. We also will not have Bloodlust since we were utilizing a strategy of Bloodlusting on trash packs the whole time as well. So I will have AP up here. In 60 seconds, I'll have Deathborn. So I think this fight is actually going to last longer than 2 minutes. So what I want to do here is I want to Touch of the Magi AP open with my secondary on use trinket, and I want to use Deathborn with AP on midway through the fight if I can. So let's see what I do. Survey says. Touch. And okay. Touch AP and secondary on use trinket, which is in this case my PvP trinket. 3 crits. Oh man. 23,000 Touch of the Magi. 3 crits. That was pretty lucky. I don't normally crit that much. Shimmer out of that explosive or volcanic. I reapply my barrier. Make sure I kick one of those. Make sure as little death bolts are going off as possible. We're at 60% right now, so I'm just trying to hold. I'm about to run out of mana. I should evocate here. Very clean. We have 2 Clearcast procs. I want to use those before my Clearcast procs expire, and they were about to expire. So that was a good use as well. Orb to get some charges back. Arcane Explosion up to 4. Reapply my Prismatic Barrier. Very good utilization of defensives here. I still have all of my major options for defensives, which I should, right there, probably should have. I'm just going to block. I see that I can't, so right there, great awareness right there. I had one of the little ghost dudes running at me on his mount at the same time as the beam was going to push me into it. If I did not use Ice Block there, I would have been a dead-ass mage. So it was great utilization of my options. Okay, we're going to make sure we try and kick one, and I do. Very good. We kill them as quick as possible. The Demon Hunter had darkness down, so that was very good. I utilize my mirrors here since it's really low in the fight as far as percentage goes. Right now it's just all about surviving. I do have Arcane Power available, so right now I should have used it. Oh, here we go. Touch of the Magi Arcane Power. All right. You go, Brofessor. You go. Good stuff. So very, very good run overall. Looking at the damage meters, that Hunter was a freaking monster. And this is kind of where, you know, I just don't think Necrolord is going to perform that well on Fortified. Yeah, 5.4k DPS is pretty low compared to what I would have normally done. On this dungeon with Karain, I would have done easily over 6k DPS, and most likely closer to 6.5. But that Hunter was also doing a lot of damage, and we oversynced our cooldowns too many times. So oversyncing your cooldowns is going to reduce your overall DPS substantially. So that's something you want to avoid. I think my biggest mistake this entire dungeon was oversyncing cooldowns with that Hunter. Since we both utilized our cooldowns so much, we didn't have them up for a lot of packs, where if he used his there and I used mine there, we would have been able to maximize our DPS off of our specific cooldowns and have better uptime on the totality of our cooldowns. So that is part of the reason why I didn't perform that good on DPS in this key. The other reason is that Necrolord simply does not perform as well on Fortified weeks as Night Fae is going to perform on Fortified weeks. So that's another big important note there. Damage breakdown here, and this is what I love to look at here. Like, it is a Fortified week, and I still had the majority of my damage come from Arcane Blast. So this is something too that Necrolord, it changes your damage breakdown quite a bit. Normally Barrage would be around that 32% range, really 30 to 35% range. But because of how strong Necrolord is with Arcane Blast, you end up blasting a lot more, and that will cause your Arcane Blast to do most of your damage. Oh, 70k barrage. That's a thick barrage. Very good. And my IQD actually did some damage for some reason instead of giving me a stat bonus, so the shaman wanted that ring, so tossed the shaman the ring. Something I like to look at as well is interrupts. This is important to note if you are or not interrupting enough. So mages have one of the longest interrupt cooldowns at 24 seconds. Thanks to surging, if you hit an interrupt, it goes down 3.8 seconds. So I was able to compete on interrupts with melee interrupts that are much shorter. So we actually had a really good, everyone in this group did an amazing job interrupting. So that looks really clean. Something to also look at for your performance here, instead of just looking at damage done, because I think it's very important here. You don't want to just look at damage done as your main source of, did I do good in this key, right? Looking at your interrupts, and then also looking at, very important as well, is damage taken. Damage taken is extremely, extremely important to look at. If you notice that you are constantly on the high end of damage taken, that's a problem. And in this key, it looks like everyone in the group actually did a really good job. Honestly, anything under 1.2k is like very, very good levels of damage taken in most keys. Obviously, that does depend on the key and how much accessory damage there are from mechanics. But it does look really good. Like everyone in this dungeon just did a really good job of not taking additional bonus damage. But generally, you do want to be as low as possible. And if you're seeing yourself as, 4 or 5 on the damage taken list, that'll show very good for how you're performing defensively in keys, utilizing your prismatic barrier, utilizing your ice block, utilizing mirror images, utilizing your invisibility to reduce your damage taken. And that is a wrap up of the key. So overall, summarizing Necrolord, I will not be playing Necrolord permanently. I actually think after testing Necrolord prior to the buffs rolling out, this has been a great experience. I just don't like the playstyle personally. I think the cooldown management of Necrolord it's just not as fluid as it should feel. With that 3-minute cooldown, with AP on a 2-minute cooldown, Touch of the Magi and Rune, there's so many different cooldown timers. It just, you feel like you're often holding your cooldowns and it doesn't play out right. Or if, say this, one of the big problems with this too is like if your group does really low DPS, then you may have an easier time of utilizing your cooldowns because no one else is performing that well. If you have a group of people that are doing really good DPS, then it's really hard to know how long do I need to time out my cooldowns to make sure I have them up when I need them for boss fights or big trash packs. This has kind of been my experience with Necrolord. It's I didn't use my cooldowns enough, or I tried to overutilize my cooldowns and then didn't have them for when I needed them. And that's just how Necrolord feels. Although it is insanely good damage when you have Deathborn up. I just, even after the buff, I don't like the play style. Even though it is really cool seeing those massive, massive DPS numbers. But if you're someone who you love the Necrolord thematics and you want to spend a lot of time practicing on mastering those cooldown timings, I definitely think it's possible. It's possible to master those cooldown timings. It's going to perform very, very well on tyrannical weeks, and I think it's going to be a solid performer in raid as well. So do not be afraid to go Necrolord if you're someone who loves the Covenant thematics. You are going to be able to play it at a competitive level and maintain solid DPS figures probably top the meters out of any other Covenant on Tyrannical week, and maybe slightly underperform on Fortified week. Wrapping things up here, Professor signing off. Thank you for watching the video. Please subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. It really helps me out, as well as liking the videos if you've enjoyed them. Comment down below on your thoughts. Do you like Necrolord? You want to be a Skelly boy? All right, everyone.